We are so back as we are barraged with an insane amount of plot twists, including Gaban's key to defeating the God Knights with Haki, Gunko's origin as Brook's daughter, Marie-Joie being under assault, and fucking emo showing up on Elbaf, huh? However, among all of these, as always, there's some details you may not have realized, such as the language that Gunko uses in Japanese with Brook, detailing more details about their background, or how emu's powers might work in the way that the mark is conferred to those who make a deal with the devil. So let's break down all the details in these past two chapters. On the cover, we see that Yamato parts ways with Tama, Komachio, Speed, and Raizo, continuing his journey with Ulti on page 1 in tow. Behind them you can very briefly see one of the chimneys of the old prisoner mine, as well as Udon Castle continuing construction. Ulti and page 1 are now clothed more like proper vassals, with Ulti carrying a coat that has Wano's sun symbol on it, much like that of the ancient kingdom, and is bowing to the others in a sign of acting more like a samurai. Yamato meanwhile carries an Amigasa hat, which was gifted by Tama as thanks for being rescued, since her whole talent was weaving Amigasa hats, just like how she taught Ace. In the description, it's mentioned that this hat is meant for Kawamatsu, who is waiting at Hakumai, meaning that Kawamatsu is most likely the daimyo of Hakumai, while Kiku is, by elimination, most likely the daimyo of Ringo, again making sense since she was born there. The next chapter's cover instead is a color spread, which depicts the Straw Hats working at and frequenting a maid cafe. Many of you likely know, but maid cafes are a type of cafe that became popular in Japan, where waitresses dress as maids and serve their clients as if they were the maids from a rich household because, well, some people are into that. The title on the top right reads as Botakuri Maid Cafe, which translates to rip-off maid cafe in much the same way that Shaki's Botakuri bar in Shabondi translates to Shaki's rip-off bar. This is also why the tray Bonnie's carrying has rip-off written on it, what some English readers might mistake as rest in peace and thinking it foreshadows her death or whatever. This explains Usopp's and the cat's reaction, as they are absolutely shocked at the bill they have to pay. Lilith taunts him while Luffy, Zoro, and Chopper could care less. Knowing her, however, it wouldn't be surprising if this was all Nami's plan. In maid cafes, usually maids will serve omurice or omelette rice while writing on it a special message with ketchup, usually an affectionate and cutesy message. Here instead, however, Nami is writing my gold mine as well as the kanji for gold, so her intentions are pretty obvious. This chapter focuses on Ronya, whom the chapter is named after, and as we've mentioned previously, she might be named after Ronja Rovardotter, a famous Swedish fantasy book set in Viking Scandinavia, which famously got adapted into a fairly iconic Japanese anime. As she's about to be dropped off, all the giants from different places had to save her, including some of the giant warrior pirates heading there, including Ripley trying to save her son, and some giants hopping on as far from what looks like from the buildings to be Craftsman Village. In this case, we get a wider panning shot of this side of the Sun World, which properly shows us the entirety of Branch Route 8, which in this case we see being referred to by some characters as Jupachi for short, which literally just means a combination of the word for tree, Ju, and the word for 8, Hachi. But you could translate this tree 8 as something like BR8 or Brait in a similar way. It shows how at the source of the branch is the Warrior Spring with the Walrus School and the Owl Library, while on the tip of it is the West Village with Orest Castle. If you zoom in closely, you can spot Mumas attacking the West Village as well as attacking the collapsed Great Eric, while if you look at the top right, you can spot the colossal swords indented into the tree, and get a feel for how truly gigantic beyond our understanding this sword really is. If you focus on the branch itself, you can spot the part that started burning thanks to Loki's fire as no vegetation is left, while just left of it you can spot 10 little dots which represent the children walking. Robin comes out to confront Sommers, attacking him with a move that she calls Thienfleur Craspedia, adding a new move to her repertoire of Thienfleur moves which include Delphinium, Wing, Spider Net, and Big Tree, and actually the first one that is new since Thriller Bark. Much like Delphinium or, well, literally Big Tree, Craspedia is yet another flower, whose name is derived from Greek kraspedon, meaning fringed edges, given its shape. In the flower language, its bright yellow colors symbolize joy and happiness. In this case, the reference behind this flower is likely the fact that it has a very long stem, and as such, Robin hits Sommers with a hand that extends incredibly long, almost like a Gomu Gomu no Mi punch, and thus that long arm looks exactly like the long stem of a Craspedia. Robin then throws herself off the edge alongside Sommers. Now this is just part of her plan since, as expected, this was just one of her flower clones. Sommers comments that she wanted to put him out of reach from the kids, implying that his thorns only have effect within a certain vicinity. Meanwhile, the actual Robin attempts to free Nami and the others. However, the Straw Hats are wrapped up in Gunko's arrows, which can't be cut with a normal knife, meaning they remain trapped. You'll notice that Brook has been wrapped in many more arrows, perhaps Gunko feeling vindicative about his betrayal towards her, whilst Nami freaks out about Robin, even letting out a "Kya" sound effect as he's so joyful. At the same time, Nami is also shown to be incredibly indignated with Sommers for holding children hostages, due to her love for protecting children, and can be later seen also suffering when Ironia is willing to make her biggest sacrifice. Even in her final moments, Ronya's optimism shines through. However, Yarul decides to set the school and library on fire. Though Ronya will likely be saved and Sommers and Gunko may soon be stopped, the fire is another question. So even if the demands are over, Ange may have already set fire to both, and protecting those may prove difficult. Though the fires caused by Loki were already put out, the fires set now by Ange may prove devastating, and not only could they destroy the countless history contained within the library, even including the research that Ohara had on more than one poneglyph detailing contents about the Void Century and the Ancient Kingdom, seemingly even the name given what Clover said, though admittedly again Vegapunk had already read them so Lilith might still remember, but more than anything, it risks going out of control and setting the rest of the Atom Tree on fire, risking burning down the entirety of Elbaf as we know it. However, Sommers is stopped by Gaban, who cuts his arm off and slashes Sommers through the chest. As a pretty neat detail, the blood spurts out in between the two top panels, showing a cool effect of how deep the wound goes that it literally cuts through the page. The two clearly have some history, as Sommers clearly recognizes him and even fears Gaban, particularly because his arm doesn't regenerate. This seems to indicate that Gaban is able to harm Sommers, but why is this? Well, we don't know for sure, but the simplest answer would be Haki. Of course, we can spot that Gaban's axe here is coated in Haki, and this doesn't seem to be a devil fruit, but more than anything, we have a precedent for this, being Joy Boy's Haki. Joy Boy's Haki Blast was so powerful that it completely negated the powers of the Gorosei. Not only did it forcibly transform all of them back to their human forms, but it also undid the powers of the Abyss by sending everyone but Saturn back to Marie-Joie, since Saturn did come there presentially. As such, it's even possible that instead of the Gorosei receiving their scars prior to attaining their powers, that perhaps those scars were inflicted by incredibly powerful Haki users in the past, maybe even the likes of Joy Boy, to the point not even the powers of Imu's mark could regenerate them. We were previously told that incredibly powerful Haki can suppress the powers of devil fruits, and so even if the powers conferred by the Abyss might be slightly different than those of traditional devil fruits, they are still devil conferred powers, and as such are still vulnerable to Haki. It does seem, however, that very strong Haki is needed to deal damage to those with the mark, with someone on Gaban's level being needed to injure Sommers, and in the case of the Gorosei likely needing someone even stronger, which is why not even Luffy was able to injure them yet, as he might still need to develop his Haki even further. This could, however, pave the way for Gaban helping Luffy and perhaps other Straw Hats further strengthen their Haki, in the same way that Rayleigh taught him the basics, to the point where he could finally be strong enough to fight back against not only these types of opponents, but perhaps even Imu directly. As Sommers falls to the ground, Gaban exclaims what can be translated as "You've grown weak," which once again shows that the two have a past together. Sommers tries shielding his next attack with a move called Ibaria. This is a pun, as Ibara is the word for thorns, with him having eaten the Iba Ibanomi, but here is combined with barrier. The kanji reading reads instead as thorn wall. He then follows this up with another attack called Ibarash, which once again is a pun between Ibara, thorns, and rush, which in Japanese is sometimes used to refer to a rush of fists hitting one after another, so in this case a barrage of thorns, a Ibaraj, if you will. The kanji reading reads as thorn hunt. However, he combines this with another attack with the combining and with a move he calls Gurenjigoku, which translates to Crimson Hell. If you recall, this move is in fact the same name as Impulse Down level 1, Crimson Hell. There's a lot of conclusions that could be drawn to this, but what comes to mind to me is that if Imu conferred these powers, then what if the levels of Impel Down relate to Imu in some regard, even if it is just thematically? While Summer stuns him, however, Gaban cleanly cleaves him in half with an attack called Futenraku, which roughly translates to X-Heaven. However, this also is likely a pun, as Futenraku in Japanese would also usually mean infallible or undefeatable. He then rushes to Ripley's side as he recalls Colin's birth. This was 20 years ago given his age, which must have been 4 years after Roger's death. Interestingly, in this time, Gaban already had the scar around his eye, meaning he must have gotten this scar between the time that he saw the One Piece 25 years ago and 20 years ago. Perhaps once again it's tied with a younger Loki or Elbaf. Gaban prepares to attack Gunko with powerful haki, as indicated by the aligning sparks and the bari sound effect, which represents the crackling of haki thunder. However, through what looks like future sight, he sees Colin getting pierced and likely dying, so Gaban surrenders, in much the same way he did against Luffy and Zoro, even using the same words. Interestingly, Gunko also notices that Gaban will surrender before he himself says that he will surrender, as indicated by the panel of her noticing beforehand, which coupled with what we mentioned previously where she seemingly foresaw Usopp's attack, once again suggests that she might also have future sight herself. As a result, Gaban falls off the Sun World, but Chopper leaps after him, likely to use Guard Point as a way to cushion his fall. However, Colin screaming about his father suddenly awakens an old memory within Gunko, a memory that she seemingly can't recognize, but it is very much real. A memory that she seemingly shares with her father, as she screams out, "Father!" with said father chanting in her memory, "Yo-ho-ho!" Wait, what? Yes, there's no doubting it. Gunko's father is in fact Brook, which, if it wasn't obvious enough by the yo-ho-ho and the afro silhouette, is also clear by his speech pattern, which is the unequivocally polite form in which Brook speaks. Not just that, but there's also music notes between them, showing that Brook might actually be playing some music to Gunko, perhaps even being Sasake. The similarity of this scene to Kuma and Bonnie's Nika dance makes me wonder if this is somehow in some way relating to Gunko's fear of Nika, or how that ties into all this, and how much of that was her or maybe even Imu influencing her. Now, just to be clear, it's still possible that this could all be misleading, and that her screaming out "Father" and her hanging out with Brook, despite being side by side, could be different things and was crying out to a different father, while Brook was more of a supporting figure in her past. And even if Brook was the father, we still don't know if he was the biological one or just the father figure, particularly as she later calls him Brook rather than father, but for now let's at least run with the assumption that he's a father figure of sorts for the sake of the argument. Thinking about it though, it now makes more sense why Gunko felt her heart ache kicking Brook, as another repressed memory likely arose. This explains why Brook found Gunko to be familiar, which would be weird to forget your own daughter, but keep in mind, for Brook it's been well over 50 years, and by that point, you'd never think that someone as young as Gunko could be your daughter. Except, we're forgetting, Gunko is immortal, she's perennially youthful, and thus, just like the Gorosei, doesn't age. So her age must have frozen at some point, which is what caused the discrepancy and why Brook's own kid is still alive and young, despite despite him being 90 years old. Brook still seems to recall her face, claiming she sure looks familiar to her, but is likely dismissing it due to the age difference. It's also likely that Gunko may not be her real name, especially since it's such an odd name, being written with kanji and reading literally as child soldier. This, however, explains her love for Soul King's music, as she likely didn't remember him, but may have felt an emotional connection that subconsciously drew her to his music. If they are biologically related, crazily enough, it's even possible that Gunko's heterochromia, her differently colored eyes, may have been inherited from Brook, because after all, we've never seen Brook's eyes. Back when he was still alive, he was always wearing sunglasses, and even when we saw him as a child in A Color Spread, he still had sunglasses there as well. So since heterochromia can be hereditary, Brook may actually have had heterochromia himself. To better understand the relation, let's review the little we know about Brook's past. All we have to go beyond the fact that he is 90 years old, being born in 1434, is what Brook told us upon joining the Straw Hat Pirates, that he was the knight commander of a certain kingdom's military squadron. Particularly the words used here are Goei Sendan, which can mean military squadron or escort squadron, basically a group of knights or guards, and Brook himself held the title of Dancho. If you've been paying attention, you might notice that Dancho is the same title that Shamrock currently holds, translating to Knight Commander, and being the leader of a squadron of knights, though again not the same role as the Supreme Commander that Garling holds. Brook only referred to the place he was from as a certain kingdom, Toaru Okoku, but we don't have details beyond that on where this really is. Brook's origin is listed as West Blue in the river cards, but that's as far as we currently know at least. Maybe the truth could actually be different. There was some speculation in the past on if this could be the Toroa Kingdom, a kingdom of handling mentioned with Baron, a slave that was action at Shibandi's human shop, since he was said to be a musician and dressed very similarly to Brook, and the Toroa Kingdom is in the West Blue. But this is just a theory without any confirmation so far. It appears that at some point, Brook and Gunko were separated, quite tragically given the way that Gunko cries. She screamed "Oto-sama," which means father, but particularly uses the honorific sama, which is a very polite honorific that usually only rich ladies or those of a noble/high background would use to refer to their father, but in English you could picture as using father instead of dad. This actually checks out, because something that gets lost in translation is that Brook always speaks in polite Japanese, being a sign of a higher upbringing. This is also why he often uses the honorific san to refer to people, such as him calling Luffy as Luffy-san, which makes sense if he was a knight. If you look at the panel, you can even spot what kinda seems to be like a knight outfit with a sword on Brook's silhouette. Within this memory, Brook also comments on how he has the dream of becoming a pirate, which lines up with what he also mentioned about his past, on how after that period of being a knight, he became a member of the Rumber Pirates, and eventually its captain after Yorkie was forced to leave. Hopefully, though, this is not another case of Shanksitis or of deadbeat dad, but rather as a result of them being torn apart. But it seems like Brook becoming a parrot may be related to him being separated from Gunko. Ultimately, there is the possibility that Brook was indeed from a kingdom like Toroa in the West Blue, and Gunko got somehow roped and kidnapped into the God Knights, and thus the two were separated. But then, why was Imu interested in making her a God Knight? But there's also the other possibility that some have considered that what if Brook was part of the God Knights? After all, Dancho is the same position that Shamrock now holds, so it could potentially make sense. However, one would wonder how a God Knight, particularly a Dancho, would not have the mark and thus be conferred Imu's powers, if that's something you can even get rid of, and Brook did actually get hurt and, well, die, but it's at least worth considering if there's some reason to justify it all, as Oda very easily could. As she regains her memories, Gunko rushes towards Brook, likely to help him, which seems to suggest that her own memories were being hidden and repressed, but this might suggest that a lot of her personality altogether may have been altered to begin with, which is a terrifying thing to think about, what likely is an effect of the mark. This brings into question, however, why Imu was interested in making Gunko a God Knight, particularly if Brook was not a celestial dragon himself, if that is the case, and why Imu would brainwash her this way to at all costs make her a god knight. However, just as Gunko runs back towards Brook, suddenly a voice enters her head. This is Imu talking telepathically to all the god knights there, just like we saw with the Gorosei. We see in this instance that Sommers is still alive, showing that Gaban stopped his regeneration but seemingly didn't actually kill him. Imu, however, drops a massive bomb, being that right now the Holy Land is a sea of flames, stating that Marijois is literally on fire, being burned and assaulted. This explains why Shamrock came back to Marijois. They weren't just being cautious, they were literally being under assault and needed Shamrock right away. And even now, Imu is still demanding for the other god knights to end this job quickly and come back because they still need manpower and Marijois. However, this is shocking. This is basically world-shattering news, as an assault on the Holy Land is something fairly unprecedented, with the only two similar attacks being by Emmet 200 years ago and by Fisher Tiger 15 years ago. Though, by the way, that Imu describes this, claiming to need more manpower, this is far likely from just one rogue attacker, but a full-on assault by a group of people, which can be likely either one of two: the revolutionaries finally making their move, and thus, as Dragon put it, the god knights having to move, or potentially the Blackbeard pirates setting the next stage of their plan. Either way, while we likely won't see what's happening right away, keep this in your mind because this is no doubt the start of an incident of unprecedented proportions. However, this isn't enough, because the most insane part of all of this is Imu showing up directly on Elbaf. Though more precisely, this does not seem to be presentially, but rather Imu seemingly ends up taking Gunko's body, which once again shows the depth to which the mark basically links all those who have it to Imu. This, however, adds a whole other layer to how Imu's powers work, because it seems like the mark gives people not just an extension of Imu's powers, but also literally an extension of Imu's body. As such, the immortality and perennial youth that comes with this may not just be all the god knights being conferred this power of immortality through the Ope-Ope-no-Mi being used again and again and again to give perennial youth, but rather it just being something that Imu has, likely through the Ope-Ope-no-Mi, as Ivankov suggested, a trait that extends to all those who share this body link with Imu. So Imu may have gotten this immortality through the Ope-Ope-no-Mi long ago, but then anyone who shares the mark also has it as a result. As such, when Saturn died, it may have been due to Imu cutting the link between them and thus Saturn aging all of a sudden and turning into a skeleton. Though this brings up the potential tragic ending to this story of what might happen if Imu revokes Gunko's immortality and causes her to age up. But considering that Brook died at age 38, Gunko must be around 70 years old at most, so we could still have a bittersweet reunion between the two as she simply stays old. This might even make me wonder if all the Gorosei seemingly having Conqueror's Haki really is due to all of them having that ambition to grant them Conqueror's Haki, all 5 of them having that level of power, when it was mentioned that Conqueror's Haki only manifests in 1 in several million people, but rather this being an extension granted by Imu, essentially being Imu's Haki that they're able to use through their bodies, though likely a slightly weaker version due to their limited bodies. This would also explain why we pondered that Gunko's powers resemble what Imu used to kill Cobra with an arrow, as it is possible the powers Imu conferred to the God Knights could be powers that Imu already has and that they simply are channeling as a result. Though this brings the question, since they do have actual fruit names, if Imu basically just could eat unlimited devil fruits and channel them that way, or simply being the sea devil that created originally those fruits can just confer these powers so easily. Which means that Imu may also be able to generate thorns, create nightmarish mumas, and so on and so forth. However, this means that not only can they share the telepathic network with Imu, but Imu can even seemingly manipulate memories or completely take over their bodies. And in this case, it seems that Imu is quite literally taking over Gunko's physical body, not just her consciousness, but seemingly even transforming her body. This is followed by powerful Haki lightning sparks, including the body sound effect of cracking thunder, once again suggesting a Conqueror's Haki. Her heterochromic eyes change to Imu's red pupils of the same color, while her hair actually grows longer, considerably longer than we've ever seen Gunko with. with. And furthermore, even the kids mention how her face morphed into something scary, proving that there is a physical change. This would suggest that this is Imu showing their true form through Gunko, meaning that Imu's true form does in fact have long hair, which may suggest that Imu could be a woman. And this in fact reinforces the idea that we've long since had, and I've mentioned several times, that Saint Nerona Imu of the Void Century, who was originally at that time referred to with male terms by Ivankov, may have used the personality switching operation of the Ope Ope no Mi to switch bodies with Nefertari Lily, thus leading to the vanishing of her body, and then fallingly got the perennial youth operation, which now extends to the God Knights too, which might explain why Imu here seemingly has Lily-like long hair. This means that we might get a glimpse at Imu's true appearance, but it's possible the transformation might be partial, not to mention that it shouldn't be much more than what we see here with Gunko's eyes and hair, as her mouth is still covered and so is most of her body anyway. So it's basically a bit of a tease. We might still need to wait until we see actual Imu in the future, but just getting to see part of Imu is absolutely insane. But as Imu descends as Gunko, he exclaims, "Mu ga misete yaru," which means Mu will show you. Mu, as we've established, is Imu's own first-person pronoun, which we still don't quite fully know what it actually means. And it's also worth noting that it's an elongated Mu sound with two U's. At the very least, Mu is part of Imu, though Imu is written with just one U, while Mu is written with two of them, an elongated sound. But others have suggested that Mu may relate to meaning emptiness or dreams in Japanese, and potentially a whole other host of meanings that some have tried to link, like the lost continent of Mu and whatnot, so we can't still really say for sure. However, this Mu ga misete yaru is followed by Kami no Shihai, which means Mu will show you the dominance of God. In this case, Imu believes to be a god incarnate, with Shihai translating to supremacy or to rule, to control, to dominate. So Imu is saying that Mu will show the power of dominance over those in Albeth, the power of God, intending to take action directly and making us face the final boss right now, with the catch that this isn't Imu's real body, and as such is but a tease of what this truly devilish creature can do, and the way that its powers extend to those who have struck a deal with the devil. However, it is quite ironic that the devil itself fancies to be God. To close off, we have the editor's comment for this week, which simply states Korin, which basically just translates to God descends.